Hi, I'm Gavin,
And I'm Dave.
and you're on the fringe.
Come along with us for a ride on a podcast where we talk about an area or a thing going on in the world that needs more attention, just like you do. Let's go.
On the fringe. Here we go. Hey, hey, hey! Welcome back. We've got another bright, shiny episode of On the Fringe. I'm Gavin. This is my good friend Dave.
Hey, everybody.
And this week we're tackling more of a broad topic uh, that we're calling the future of education and the death of the attention span. It is two people who've worked extensively in education. Uh, we have various opinions on where it's going, where it's at, and I think kind of what's gone horribly wrong. Um, Dave, you just want to share? We were just in the middle of a conversation. Uh, do you want to share what you just said? Because you said something that I think is really profound.
So honestly, I don't know why, and this is just me thinking here. People are spending millions and millions of dollars and even billions of dollars on their education, yet they want to be entertained and they don't want to put any sort of work into that investment and they just expect, I mean, this is maybe, Dave, what the hell are you thinking here? I buy something, I get something. And yes, that's true, but education is something that you can't just buy and it magically pops into your brain yet. Yet. In the future, this might change. But in order to get good at something, you've got to have discipline and you've got to be able to keep an attention span for longer than 45 seconds in order to be able to think through the processes of how to do something. And you've got to screw up while you're going through those processes in order to actually figure out how they work and play around with them and not be afraid to play around with them. And that's the biggest problem I think with the education system is it doesn't let people, whether they're students or adults or people that are just interested in learning, try things and make mistakes and even fail to a degree.
Uh, you
Rant
know, I,
over.
I, it's I think it's a very fair cop. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I really agree with most of it. I think a lot of it can be traced to the commercialization of education and the rise of the attention economy, which has infiltrated education because now you have this hyper capitalistic marketplace of attention that basically dictates how people use media. Well, that filters down to kids, and that dictates how educational systems are kind of forced to proceed. If you have people who literally cannot focus for more than 30 seconds at a time, uh, you you're forced to work with those people. You're forced to deal with it. I think another thing, and this is, this has been a talking point in the States for a while and not always used by people I agree with. But I think one of the things that's also happened is in a particular stratum of education. I'm not making generalizations here, but I think in a particular stratum of education, there has a, there's really been a move towards everyone deserves a high score, or we at least need to give everyone a high score because we don't want to deal with the parents, and they think their child deserves a high score.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that I think has had a very detrimental effect on certainly. models of education that I'm familiar with. Again, this is a generalization, but it's created. It's
It's created
created.
a monster.
Yeah, it has. I tend to agree with that. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, and I mean, I think with this, you look at it in sports too. Look at it from the sports perspective, where you have kids that are 4 or 5 years old, they're playing soccer. Okay, at the end of the season, everybody gets a trophy. They're 4 years old, they're 5 years old. Okay, if you want to do that. But when you have kids that are in sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, and they're playing basketball, and every kid still gets a trophy, and there might be one trophy that's a little bit bigger for the kid who's the MVP on the team, but there's virtually no real difference in terms of who shows up to practice and who shows up to play
Mhm.
and how many minutes each person puts into the game. And we're just going to grade everybody the same, whether they show up and they play hard or whether they show up and they don't do anything, and whether they win or whether they lose. And I think the education system has to focus more on output. And you can look at it and go, okay, you've got a student here that's very, very gifted in one area. You have another student that's not gifted in that same area. But the student who's not gifted is working his butt off. That kid should get some recognition for pushing through and being disciplined enough to try to learn something that's very challenging for him,
I think
especially.
yeah.
Mhm.
No, and I agree with that. I think what we're both talking about in a way is uh, the flaws inherent in any kind of standardized grading system,
Mhm.
which is it continues to be an issue in that, yeah, I mean, and I've encountered this throughout my career where, and you have to do this as a teacher, and sometimes you're given the room to do this, and I'm thankful that in the current job I have, I do. If you have a kid who's very capable, but it is maybe not pushing themselves to that degree because they don't feel they need to, and then you have another kid who's really struggling to deal with the material, but is producing, and you can see them putting the effort in. Um, I think you should grade based on the student, not on the structure you're working in. But that's very difficult. I mean, I've had a lot of luxuries in my career, and one of them has been very small class sizes where I'm able to focus on the student, and most people in education do not have that luxury at all. And that's another issue. I mean, you just don't have the time to give individual students that kind of attention. And I think, particularly in the systems that we're talking about, people have been sort of trained to associate high grades with success, and that they don't really mean success, I would say. I think by now they mean something quite different. Another thing that I think we're also sort of skirting around is the very real issue of grade inflation, which is a problem everywhere.
Mhm. It definitely is. Because you basically, if the lowest grade that you can give somebody
Mm,
is still a passing grade, whether they show up and they do nothing or they show up and they work their butts off. And I can just say from my experience being an English teacher, where I did tests in the past, I made tests. I made a whole entire speaking English speaking curriculum. And the lowest grade I could give a student if they showed up was a passing grade. If the
mm.
student showed up and said 3 words in English, and a student showed up and spoke for 3 minutes, there was a difference between the student who spoke for 3 minutes and the student who spoke for 3 seconds, but the student who spoke for 3 seconds still passed. But that gap dropped considerably, where if you speak for 1 minute or 2 minutes and you can speak gibberish for half of it, then that student who speaks for 1 minute is going to get a grade that's not far off from the student who speaks for 3 minutes.
But
And
I think this
and
takes me.
that,
No, go ahead.
mhm.
Sorry.
And I was going to say, and the problem lies in how the actual test is created in the curriculum that the
Hmm.
test is created around, where you need to have accurate metrics to judge performance and not just do it based around something like time that's easy to measure. If something is easy to measure, it generally does not give you a good amount of information that's usable to judge whether it's actually a useful item or a not useful item for helping performance or anything like that. You've got to dive into the statistics and dive into the actual performance of the person based around their capabilities.
Yeah, but I mean, as an old quant Dave, uh,
Hmm.
I I'm inherently wary of people interpreting statistics.
Hmm.
And I think it's just another thing where, anyone who's been in the game long enough, and I certainly have, you have diagnostic testing that you have to do. Uh, that in my case, I do look over it and I do look at the metrics. And the problem is they might be helpful to a degree, but they're just sort of one more thing that's put on the teacher. Oh, you need to go over your classes now. And, a lot of teachers don't have training in how to read those metrics. A lot of teachers don't have the time. So, you do have people who do sit down and look in it, and it is useful, I would say. But you also, you spend, in my experience, you can spend like a week or half a week doing these tests. You produce the data, and then people who read it don't really know what they're looking at, and they
Hmm.
don't really know how to interpret it, and it's not really what they were hired to do, so they're not going to put a lot of time into it. And it's just sort of one more thing that takes away from instruction. And one of the things that I want to go back to is I think what you were saying earlier, which is, you know, learning is not a collection of scores. Learning is a process. It's all about the process. It's all about feeding into the process. And I think, one of the gripes that I have, I suppose, is that often the metrics overtake the process.
Hmm.
And people want indicators that are not really connected to the process, that are not really connected to the individual, I guess. Um, and I suspect diagnostic tests, and to sort of call back to things we've talked about earlier, as AI gets more and more advanced, I suspect the diagnostic tests will lean more towards an interactive model. Um, and that may open up some interesting avenues, but again, I think it will feed into the really sort of clipped attention spans, the whole attention economy, as people become more used to that in their daily lives. That will be the expectation in education as well. And I think that's when AI really comes in, because you're going to see more sort of interactive modules. Um, I would say without or with minimal human supervision.
Hmm. Well, I look at that and go, okay, that's maybe beneficial, but it's also very scary
I think it's
because
really scary. I think it's really
because
scary.
for two huge reasons. One is who is actually programming the AI algorithm, and what is the
Yep.
student actually going to be learning? And then the
Hmm.
second one is how is the student actually going to be tested? And if it's an algorithm that's testing them, then how are they going to be able to go out and use what they learn in the real world? Because if they don't learn anything that's useful, then what value does the student actually have? And from my understanding of the education system, was made to basically take people and make them employable since the beginning of time. And if you have an AI run education system, how is that going to allow people to have jobs?
Well, I think we just hit on another totally, well, not totally separate. I think these are all connected. Uh, well, if you're in a world that is increasingly dominated by AI, those jobs won't exist anyways.
Hmm.
Um, Certainly, a lot of the jobs I think the current education system is designed for, which are more service oriented, those are not going to exist really, or managerial. Those are going to be phased out. So if this is coming into education, it's going to reflect what's going on in the job market as well. And I think I'm a broken record when it comes to this, but it's going to affect employability in education as well. Um, and I just, I really, I don't want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, but I do feel like it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
Yep, I'm very much with you. And I look at every single industry. It doesn't matter what it is.
Hmm.
It's education, it's business, it's government, it's defense, it's tech, it's medicine, and you're going to have probably, I would think, 40 to 50% of the jobs are going to be lost, and probably 90% of the jobs are going to be changed, I would say drastically, and every single person is going to be affected by this. Whether you're working, as a surgeon and you're a surgeon that is doing bypass surgeries or you're teaching a kindergarten class, you're going to be affected by these changes.
Yeah, and I think, initially this is going to be, concentrated in, I guess what used to be called the global north, but this is going to filter into everywhere. This is going to have a massive effect. It's already having a massive effect in a country like India, certainly in China. It, it's really, we're still figuring out the ramifications of the changes that have already occurred. And I feel like even bigger changes are just around the corner, and we can't even really wrap our heads around what we've got right now. Uh, and it is going to be just, and people in education, I'll say this, people in education are very aware of this. This is not, at least in my, little boutique corner, this is not news. They know there are going to be light speed seismic changes in terms of employment, in terms of how the system is structured within a very short period of time. But the changes that are going to have to be made are so radical, I don't think anyone is fully vocalizing them at this point in time.
Hmm. Well, I think if someone did, you would have people on the streets. If people really knew what was going to happen, I
Mm,
think you would have people on the
yeah,
streets
yeah, no, I really agree with that.
from
I
every single industry. And then they
Yeah,
would say, stop, stop this right now.
yeah,
And this is where we may be, or on the fringe, we might be out there and, kind of nuts with this. But I mean, really, if people knew what was going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and they've invested their whole entire lives or their kids' lives into getting an education that was structured over 100, 150 years ago, they would stop. They would say, we're not doing this anymore. We need to hit pause for a good long time until we can actually understand how society is going to change. And they may never hit play again on AI. They might go, we're done with this. We're going to stop it as it is, and we're going to limit where it actually reaches into because it's going to destroy everything that we've built up over the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years.
yeah.
And it could be families, it could be countries, it could be economies. It could be the whole entire structure of the world potentially.
And you know what, Dave? I want to end it there because I think that's a perfect cap for this conversation. And I completely agree with what you just said. And I think what's shocking to me is that may happen, but I suspect that by the time it happens, those changes will have already occurred.
Yeah, that'll
Uh,
be too late.
it'll be too late. I think I never want to say it's too late for a revolution. You know me, Dave. But I do feel like by the time the sort of revolutionary consciousness hits critical mass, the absolute the speed of this thing should absolutely terrify everyone. I think whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, the speed of it is absolutely incredible. And I think on that note, we appreciate everyone listening in, all of our subscribers. If you're a new listener, if you're an old listener, please like, please comment. Uh, we appreciate all of it. So from here on the fringe, thanks for listening.